Winging It is a show by Oddbear about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, our certified OUX professional Sandra will talk to James and me about OUX and how it improves communication between designers and developers. So let's dive into object mapping with OOUX.
In our last episode of Winging It, Sandra, you talked a little bit about how OOUX helps improve communication between designers and developers. We've experienced that here at Oddbird, especially when we've used object maps. Can you talk about how the object map tool works?
Sure, I would love to. So first of all, let me share my screen. Yeah, so here is an example of an object map. We use Trello often for our object maps at Oddbird, but you can use any tool. This is even just created using XD, which is the design tool. So last episode, if you go back and watch that, we talked about kind of what objects are in a digital system, how you find them when they're unintuitive or intuitive. This system here, the object map, is used to collect all of those objects for your digital system into one place so that you can then refer back to them as you're going through the project. You can use them as you talk about those objects with clients and the stakeholders in the project. And it's a place to compile all of the information about the objects in your system. So just to give you a tour of this object map here, we have a simple system that has 4 objects. It has a user. There's going to be a fitness program, a program in this fitness app. And there's going to be a badge, perhaps that you win if you complete a fitness program. And there's going to be a report, like how many fitness programs did I finish in our little imaginary digital project here. So we have listed out our 4 objects at the top. And this is a great way, even just doing this part of the object map, I have found to be extremely effective way to get everybody on the same page. It helps you define your terms of what your objects even are and what they're called so that you don't end up calling the same object something different or calling 2 separate objects the same thing. So put your objects there at the top. And then the next thing you see in yellow is attributes of the object. So this kind of attribute is called the content, and it's the unique things about the object. So like an email address, every user has a unique email address and a name, title, graphics. These are unique things to each object. Then we have a different kind of attribute called metadata. These are the things that are something you would use to sort and filter your objects by, generally. Maybe the length of a fitness program, and you want to sort to find all those fitness programs that are 30 minutes or something, and you have the length. And then finally, in this object map at the bottom, you have your related objects. So these objects that have some kind of direct relationship. So for a software user, there's a relationship in the database. The software user will have 0 to many fitness programs. And you could even go so far as to say, you could list separate relationship cards here at the bottom, like 0 to many fitness programs started, 0 to many fitness programs completed. So you're listing out the relationships that you're going to show in your system. And that is the tour there of your object map. So I'm curious to put it back to you all this time, as you've worked with me and clients in Oddbird. I'm curious what you have discovered has been helpful in our process together, and then additional questions that you might have for me about object maps too.
Yeah, I can start with that. As you said, one of the things I really like is that they provide that shared vocabulary that not only goes inside the team, right, and between designer and developers. This also usually goes all the way down to clients even. So we know we're talking about the same thing, and we're not running around trying to figure out oh, the client calls it this, they call it member and we call it software user, right? We all know
Yeah.
that we're talking about the same thing. And then the other thing that I really like as a backend developer is that this is very close to a map to design the database schema. Because in databases we have this idea also of attributes and columns, which would be in this case the little content fields. We have relations the same way as related objects are displayed here. So this is a great starting point to start designing a database according to the project needs. Um, what I also like as well is that they help us gauge the complexity of a project. So after building the object map, if we see that there's a lot of objects and they have a bunch of content fields and metadata and related objects as well, uh, I wouldn't say it maps directly to how complex the project is going to be, but at least we know, oh, definitely a 3 object project is going to be way simpler than a 50 object project, right? And that's going to help us as well to prioritize certain objects or features as well, where we can say, oh, this object, like this report, for example, that we have in the example right now, maybe that's for a second version of the app, right? We just want to start with the programs and the badges and the users, but we can see that we want to deprioritize the report for a later phase, and that way we have a semi-objective way to prioritize the features.
Absolutely. I feel like this is great for prioritization. Just to pick up on where you left off, Ed, you can prioritize objects. And I was even in a meeting where I was presenting after a discovery phase where we used this object map with a client. I was presenting the objects that we had estimated for the project. And then they said, how can we get this budget down if we need to when we go raise funding? I said, oh, great. We can actually just cut these 2 objects. These are the lower priority objects. We can cut them. It was so simple. Like it took the level of complexity in that conversation down incredibly. It was so effective. And then another way, if you want to get more granular, is when clients see their objects listed in this way and all the attributes that are going to make up an object. Oftentimes I just have like a couple here, but it's often like long, many attributes that make up an object, right? So you can even prioritize at the level of attributes. You can say we actually don't want to track the number of earned badges in phase 1, going back to our example here for the software user. That's not important for phase 1. They can just do the fitness programs and we can add tracking in phase 2. So you can prioritize at the level of the attributes and you can literally move the little cards around. If you're using Trello, you can grab the columns and move objects over to the side if they're going to be deprioritized. And if you have all your attributes as cards, you can move them down or you can move them out. Just a visual way of showing what has been deprioritized. And I find that clients really latch onto that and understand it more than other systems that I've tried, or just especially more than just verbally saying we're going to deprioritize this thing. Yeah.
I'm curious if you could say why the difference between content and metadata is helpful, or why is that a differentiation that you make early in the process?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it isn't 100% always that useful. Sometimes it can be a little confusing, honestly, to the client. But one of the reasons it's really important, I think, is that it's helping you figure out what you need to filter and sort by. And those are, maybe you have nothing to filter and sort by. And that really tells you, are you going to need to build, filter, and sort functionality or not for that thing? It gives you a sense of how complex something is. When you just are even getting a glance at the colors, you can see this is going to have a lot of need for complex sorts and filters and that kind of thing. Ed, does it help you as the backend developer to see the difference between content and metadata up front?
Yeah, I think in the database it would probably be modeled the same, or some of these things are calculated based on other ones, right? For example, the length, the number of badges is really a count of how many related objects are attached to this user, for example, right? So um, it helps a little bit to be able to see, oh, there's going to be this special field that's probably going to be need to calculate it in a different way instead of stored cleanly into the database. While other things like the locked and unlocked status of a badge, for example, those would just go right into the database and be modeled as a regular column, right? So yeah, it's useful to have them all called out. And I think that's the main benefit, even without separating them into content and metadata.
I don't typically go into whether it's content or metadata with clients because it's not important. They just need to know, what is this?
Is there a danger for the database to be too tightly coupled to the design? So if the design changes, would the database need to be restructured?
The design is an abstraction of the objects, and so is the database. So in my experience, it's way easier for them to get out of step than for them to impose too many restrictions on each other. A major goal of the object map is to make sure that the designers and the developers and clients are answering as many questions as possible at the very beginning of the process to avoid discovering those big changes when you're already into development where you're like, oh no, this is at the level of really needing to change the structure of the database or add some huge new part that's going to really increase the cost and increase the time and complexity and be wasteful. So that's what I've found in answer to that question.
Is there a benefit for front-end developers, and can the objects maybe help with a design system?
Yeah, so front-end developers can, be helped by getting on the same page too. So it helps just to have a central place where you're defining everything. And it can help with, it's a little bit orthogonal to design systems, but you can get some benefits because, let's see if I can get to my next page here that I wanted to share. So for design systems, the way that I see an object map in the whole object system helping your design system process is here in this design. Let me full screen that. So when you have your object map, the next step is to start to see what are your high priority attributes for that object and how are you going to display those everywhere the object appears in your system, whether that's in a list or in the detail view. And so if you're creating something like this list view of a fitness program has a title and it has a length. Let's pretend we've decided those are the top two most important things that everybody needs to know when they're viewing a fitness program and a list of all fitness programs. Or even if it's like a little bit of a card instead of the tiniest list view, maybe it has a thumbnail of the video of the fitness program you're just about to start. If you're making a design system and you want to have a card in your design system as one of your templates that you're going to pull in, you could perhaps use this card that you've designed here based on your object map to know, like, oh, this is what my card is going to have in it. It's going to have a title, it's going to have minutes, it's going to have a thumbnail of a video, and then there you go. There's your card. And then you do not need to wait to figure out what that is until you're out of the discovery and into the design. You just have a good sense of what some of those basic things in your design system are going to be much earlier in the process. You can start defining them, and you can, more importantly, not redesign them multiple times. So you can, if you know you have a fitness program, it could make it way simpler to just know what basic things you need in your design system, because you just have one design for each thing and you haven't accidentally designed the same thing many times, if that makes sense.
I'm curious if in the object map, if you show hierarchy in some way or lay out some of the decisions around what are the most important content fields or metadata fields on that object.
Showing hierarchy, you're saying, like importance. Are you talking about prioritization?
Yeah. So when you're going back and figuring out which fields to show in each of those views,
Yeah.
or in one view and then applying that across the board, is this something that you communicate through this object map, or is that as a subsequent step?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. Yes, you can definitely rearrange those cards, those little attribute cards, the yellow and the red and the blue, to show before you even start designing anything like what I just showed you in the previous screen. You can get a visual of what the prioritization will be of the things that will make up this object by literally moving the cards and listing them in order of what is the most important thing. So we have, for the fitness program column here in our example object map, right now I just have title, video, length, and then the related objects there. But if I was going to show them in order of priority, I would probably move that length, that red length card up above video, because we know that we want the title and the length in the most minimal version of this object of the fitness program. So you can even get a sense of those before you design anything at all. You'll have a visual representation of what it's going to look like. The goal would be to have everything here in this column for each object that you're going to have on the detail view of your object. Everything is there and then listed all in order of priority. Sometimes that doesn't mean when you're designing, that doesn't always mean that it's going to be the same in terms of top to bottom on the detail view. Sometimes something that's low priority just means that it's like small and gray. You know, maybe it's near the top, but it doesn't take up very much attention. But at least you can start to get a sense of what even a detail page might look like for an object from this map. Yeah.
Thanks.
Then would you say object maps change a lot during the project lifecycle, or have you found them to stay pretty much intact from when you first map your objects? Is that how they usually end up, or keep discovering maybe new attributes or new ways that objects are related, or maybe even entirely new objects? Does that happen very, very often?
Yes. So the way that we have often used this object map in Oddbird's process for clients that have smallish projects, perhaps, and we're doing a short discovery phase, is that we try to map out as much as we can, understanding all the objects in the system as much as we can and all the attributes, but invariably, we definitely discover new things along the way, where the client just didn't even understand that something was a possibility until they saw part of their application actually created or mocked up, and they're like, ooh, what if we did this and we have the budget for it, let's add that in. And so that could be an entirely new object. More often it's an entirely new set of attributes instead. And so the nice thing is that even if you didn't catch it up front, now you can go back and add those things into your object map and track them and have a way of visualizing how they might fit in related to the other things in the system, and get a sense of the prioritization of those new attributes you've identified as you go through the project. And definitely the prioritization can change. It's good to try to give it a stab to think of what will be the most important attributes of your object before you've designed anything. But sometimes you just can't visualize it as well in this system, and once you see it actually designed, you're like, yeah, some of these things need to be changed in order of priority, and then you can go back and do that. Depending on how big the project is, you might choose not to continue updating your object map throughout the project. If you decide it's not going to remain the source of truth and it was just a tool for discovery to help you launch That's okay. You don't have to keep updating your object map if it's adding too much time to the project, especially if it's very small. But it is a really good tool if you do keep updating it, to keep everybody coming back to that same agreement that you had from the beginning, the same understanding of the project, and what all the terminology is that you're going to use especially. Are there other ways that we found it helpful that we didn't cover yet?
I'd maybe like to know what the certification process is like, after you went through it. How is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting certified was a really intense process, and I highly recommend it. So Sophia Prater is the person who is really the person behind getting this idea of the OOUX philosophy out there, and she has an entire system, the ORCA system, that you get trained in as part of this process, and the object map is one of the things that you create during the full ORCA process if you go through that. So I highly recommend the certification if you're really interested in understanding complexity in digital product design in a really deep way, and then being able to come back out from that and confidently lead projects and get everybody on the same page. It's just transformational. We had a client that had a very complex project with very complex object relationships that we were working on when I went through the certification program the first time. And I don't even know how we would have done that if we didn't have this object map to kind of keep us all on the same page, gives us terminology to be able to talk about those really complex relationships. Junction objects is the terminology for those, where you have an object that changes when it's in relationship with a different object, new attributes appear only in that unique relationship. And there are different, we had a junction object, but then there are other ways that objects can be related in tree systems and all sorts of things that you get to learn about when you're certified. OOUX.com is the place to go if you want to sign up for a certification program. You can do it self-paced, or you can do it along with a group of people and get feedback from Sophia, which I highly recommend because it is a complex system to learn. And so once you've got it, it can really transform the way you work with the people in your company and your clients. Another thing that I wanted to mention that I've benefited from at Oddbird from this system is that I would often lead our discovery process, and I would try to collect this information, and it would be mostly in text documents, like collecting requirements. And then we would get into the project, and Ed or Johnny or somebody else on the Oddbird team would say, okay, so we have a name in this system. Is it like we're doing first name and last name? Or is it two separate things? Is it the name is one thing? So we have badges. Like, how many badges are in the system? Is it like 2 badges or like thousands of badges? How many fitness programs? Like, do we need to sort those fitness programs? And we would just get into all of these questions in the middle of trying to do the graphic design and the layout design of pages. That is when we would be talking about the requirements for how these things were going to relate to each other and how they were going to be working in the database. And it just made the system of creating mockups like take longer and be more messy and more confusing. And this separated out the concerns. So now when we use the object map and we do it effectively, we're collecting a lot more of that information that I just described up front before we're ever trying to design it. And so that way, when you're actually trying to design a mock-up of this information, you already know it's going to be in there for the most part. And you can just, think about how it's going to look and make sure it looks pretty and is laid out in a way that people can find the things they need as quickly as possible. And you don't have to be wondering any of those questions. Developers can actually get started creating more of the things that they need to create behind the scenes because they have more of the information about what's going to be in the system using this object map process. You don't have to wait for a designer to discover that while creating mockups, for example. Do you think that has helped you as well, Ed, with projects at Oddbird?
Oh yeah, definitely. I appreciate having it in a graphical form as well, because yeah, I that's how I've done things for a long time as well, just going into a document and somehow trying to lay out in a list all the attributes of an object, but that way you don't get those relationships, for example, represented in the best way in a visual manner. So just having that map and literally using it as a map to navigate the project, right? And go and see how everything links together. That's super helpful. And as you said, also speeds things up because you don't need to ask questions. A lot of things are already answered there, or can be inferred even from how objects relate to each other. So yeah, I think it's a great productivity boost for the development as well.
And that reminded me of another thing. Just being able to, as a project leader, or in my case, like a UX designer that's doing some leading of a discovery phase and requirements collection and everything, I can now understand how backend developers thinking about a database. Doing this system taught me how databases are set up in a new way, like this zero to many or one to many idea. This has given me a visual to understand what Ed is doing when he's creating a database, and to be able to talk to Ed about the database. Imagine that, like a designer and a database developer having clear communication because they're both visualizing the same thing and those relationships of those objects in the system. It's been great. I didn't really understand the part of the process when I first started where Ed was describing how he would write out a kind of a hierarchy in text form of what the database might be. I was like, I don't know what this is used for. I'm not clear on how I can contribute to this, but here we have a way that whoever is collecting that initial requirements information, whether that's a UX designer, project manager, product manager, whatever the title is, can clearly understand what is going into the database and communicate about that. Even back to the client, I've been able to describe databases to clients in a way that they have said, oh yes, that makes sense. But that was never a thing I could do before. So it's just been amazing in so many ways, basically, to pull all the process together, especially at the beginning.
I think that's also another benefit for front-end developers. Have been in the situation where product has an idea of what they want to see, and the back end is developing something, and then front end is kind of given the task of, well, make it work with these two disparate parts, and it is that's a lot of glue that just doesn't necessarily need to happen. And this is definitely a much easier way of doing it and avoiding that problem in the first place.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, if that's all, I just want to invite our viewers and listeners to visit oddbird.net/winging it to get all the notes and links and resources that we mentioned during today's topic. You can also leave feedback there. And for the next episode, we're going to be talking about Fast API, a Python framework for building web applications that uses a lot of Python's typing system. That's going to be very interesting. And finally, if you'd like to support the show, please like and subscribe. And if you want more from Oddbird in general, you can check out our newsletter at oddbird.net/oddnews. Thank you for joining us today. And remember that best practice is a conversation. So let's keep talking.